And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate all of you for joining us for part one of our discussion about the NBA free agency. If you haven't hit that subscribe button already, please do so. That way you don't miss out on a single thing. Now that we've got our new studio up and running, we can put out a lot more videos like we were earlier on and be able to keep you all up to date just like we had hoped to from the very beginning. Now, there's a lot of moves that have already been made. Like I just got through mentioning that John Wall was being moved to, or was being released anyway by the uh, Houston Rockets anyway on a buyout. He saved or shaved off $6.5 million to be able to do so. However, he's not going to lose any money in the deal except for maybe in taxes on his new salary with the LA Clippers. Now, this edition, we want to kind of go over some of the trades and some of the other fallout that can happen through free agency. The best part of NBA free agency is that there's always a line of dominoes after every single move. That's what makes NBA free agency so much fun. Now, we've got a number of different comments already. First of which it says, what would it take to actually get Kyrie to LA? Well, LA doesn't have a whole lot to trade. So the first thing that they're going to have to do is they're going to have to move out salary going back the other way. And that's got to start with Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook making 40 plus $1 million in salary this year. That salary going out brings in Kyrie Irving. However, that's not going to just get it done. Brooklyn's going to want to get something back in compensation. Now, if that's a 2027 first round pick, maybe. However, I think that's not going to quite be enough. I think they're going to have to get a third team involved, possibly get some young pieces from them. LA is going to have to send out some second round picks and really going to have to mortgage their future pretty much all the way to the hilt if they're really going to give this thing one last run. If I'm in the Lakers' shoes before this season was even over, I would have been willing to trade away LeBron James and Anthony Davis and really get this thing restarted. Now, maybe you only had to trade away LeBron James because he is a little bit older, but I think it's just time to hit the reset button in LA. But maybe they just want to hold on for one more season and really push the chips to the middle. Having a big three of Kyrie, LeBron, and AD is a perfect big three on the floor, but how often are they going to be on the floor? LeBron has always been the Iron Man of the NBA. However, he's starting to show some time, or show that he's going to have to miss some time due to injury now, not just for rest. Anthony Davis has been a 30-plus game player for the last couple of years. Now, he hasn't played like he did in the bubble ever since he left the bubble. Kind of like Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps was great in the bubble, hasn't been the same player since. But Anthony Davis, I mean, you can't really trade him away. You gave away too much of your future to keep him. He is dynamic when he has his mind on basketball. We saw in this offseason that he tweeted out a message that he hadn't even put up a shot since the end of the offseason after the outcry of rage that everybody basically sent his way. Basically found a trainer to be able to set him up with some shooting drills and that kind of thing to kind of set the message that maybe he was focusing on basketball again. But obviously, we know it's not going to stick. He never has been nearly as committed to basketball as LeBron James has. LeBron James has been in the lab essentially ever since the season ended. You can see workout videos of him and Kevin Love working out, putting up shots, working on new things to try to improve their game. LeBron James is over 35 years old. There's not much more he can accomplish in the NBA except for maybe putting another ring on his finger, scoring titles and all that kind of a thing, extending out some records that he has. Those are the goals of LeBron James. Now, if he wants to coast to the end of his career, play for the Lakers, not be a real contender for the title, he probably stays in LA. But like I said, if I'm in LA's shoes, I send him packing. The other big story of this offseason is, of course, Jalen Brunson going to the Knicks so far. That seems to be more likely than the Kyrie going to LA scenario anyway. It seems like Brunson may actually want to take on the challenge of New York. And so there still has to be some deals done for the Knicks to be able to work out a 4-year, $100+ million deal. They still have to send off at least one, maybe two more contracts to be able to get it done. It seems like Alec Burks, who had off-season surgery on his foot, has some interest. The Boston Celtics at least have some interest in him going there. However, they're going to have to send some salary back the other way. The Knicks are looking to shed salary, not take on salary back. So maybe a sign and trade deal. Brunson going to the Knicks, maybe Dallas's first round pick going back the other way, and maybe a guy like Nerlens Noel, maybe an Alec Burks go back the other direction. Dallas is a tax team, which means they're going to have a lot of money invested in this team, and losing a guy like Jalen Brunson is going to hurt no matter how you slice it. So it's just better to kind of move forward and see what happens from there. The other issue that I see with the Knicks anyway is that they're going to invest heavily here with Jalen Brunson. all that talk about Zion Williamson possibly ending up in New York, if they do end up doing a sign and trade, they're going to have to give away some assets to do that. Not a lot, because I expect it kind of to be like a LeBron going to Miami, Miami throwing back a couple of compensation picks back to Cleveland back in the day, something like that, for it to happen. But it's not going to be anything exorbitant. However, any asset that could have gone to the New Orleans Pelicans to get a player like a Zion, that's going to be impacted by something like this, as well as cap space, those kinds of things. You still have Evan Fournier that's making 18 million. Julius Randle's making over 20 million a year. The Knicks are going to have a precarious caps management situation, especially with RJ Barrett and all that coming due. Uh, Now, as far as the biggest elephant in the room is going to be Kevin Durant. We already kind of touched on the Phoenix Suns scenario, but the entire league is going to reach out to them. I expect Phoenix to be at the top of the list as far as teams that could get him. Other teams would be pretty much anybody that has a lot of picks, namely going to be like the New Orleans Pelicans of the world. If they decide to go ahead and ship off Zion, who hasn't been performing and hasn't been able to be on the floor, maybe they go with a KD, Irving, and McCollum lineup and see what happens there. Try their luck with that big three. That'd be a very good big three. They need a guard to kind of solidify things there. But that would be a very good team that could also be in the mix for a Kevin Durant. A team like maybe the Denver Nuggets. They don't necessarily have the pick capital to do it, but they definitely have the talent on the court to be able to get something like this done. Michael Porter Jr. anyway is going to be one of the biggest contract albatrosses in the league if he is unable to stay healthy. When healthy, he's a dynamic scorer, terrible on defense, but as we've seen over the last few years, defense doesn't really matter in the NBA anymore. They're giving all the offense the entire advantage in every game. If you can play marginal defense at best, you're going to be just fine. And I think if you just get a coach to coach them up enough for 5 minutes a game, 10 minutes a game to play decent defense, they're going to be just fine. So a team like Denver who can trade back, I don't know, like Jamal Murray or a couple of their young players that they've drafted over the past couple of years, maybe something like that would be a better framework for them. The Minnesota Timberwolves have a plethora of young players as well, picks on the horizon as well. D'Angelo Russell doesn't seem like a fit there. Maybe he goes back to Brooklyn. Something like that could work as well. But let us know in the comment section what your favorite idea for Kevin Durant is. Let us know your trades. There's a number of different trades out there. A lot of sites nowadays offer trade machines. And so I see all the different trades that y'all have posted out there. A lot of our subscribers here have been posting on there as well, trying to see what other options are out there. Here at the Upside, we like to look at the next step in the sports storyline. So let's look at that next step. Let's kind of start with the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks have been rumored to get rid of John Collins for over 2 years now. He's been unhappy there. He signed there just to get the best contract that he could. And now that he's got the contract, he is absolutely finished playing in Atlanta. Now, the problem is once you send out John Collins, you're immediately looking for his replacement again. Danilo Gallinari is getting older and just isn't the player that he once was. DeAndre Hunter is a great defender, and he's a decent 3-and-D type, or excuse me, a great 3-and-D type player. However, he is not a John Collins on the offensive side of the ball. So you need somebody who can play on the offensive side of the ball as well as a John Collins, or at least has the potential to do so. They also have Clint Capella's contract, and Clint Capella, while at the time the trade seemed to work out really well for them, they got great value for him. They have a young guy that they want to go with instead of Capella, so they're going to try to move his contract as well. Maybe a team that has another contract that wants to go the opposite way, maybe they can make something work there. But John Collins seems to be on the way out the door. A couple of teams have already reached out to them. First is going to be the San Antonio Spurs. Apparently, the Hawks wanted DeJounte Murray in order to give up Collins plus picks going back to San Antonio, but it seems like that's a no-go there. It seems like the Spurs are willing to kind of build around DeJounte Murray unless they get a Drew Holiday type package, according to the media reports. That's not going to happen with the Atlanta Hawks. They're not willing to mortgage their entire front court just to get two really good dynamic backcourt pieces in DeJounte Murray and Trae Young. Now, as good as that backcourt sounds, they just wouldn't have much of a team left after that type of a trade if they chose to go that route. Now, getting a player like a John Collins to fit next to DeJounte Murray would fit very well with the San Antonio Spurs timeline. They have a lot of young pieces that they brought in, 3-and-D type players that can play at the wing positions that they can put next to John Collins. Maybe the Jakob Poeltl signing or acquisition anyway looks a little bit better. He's the last holdover of the Kawhi Leonard trade. So it'd be interesting to see what ends up happening there. But a Collins to San Antonio trade might work out. The other option we've seen out there is the Sacramento Kings. Now, the Kings already acquired Domantas Sabonis during the season last year for Tyrese Halliburton. Don't ask me why they gave up Tyrese Halliburton. He was going to be the future of that Sacramento Kings franchise. Just more bad management on their behalf anyway. So they have a decision to make. Are they going to continue to push the chips towards the middle? I believe they will. And when they do so, they're going to have a front court of Sabonis and Collins. They're going to have Fox still at the point, and they're going to have mismatched pieces beyond that. Framework for the trade would be Barnes plus picks and maybe a young guy like a Mitchell going back towards the Atlanta Hawks for John Collins. That might work. Maybe you send in some smaller pieces along the way, send back Bogdanovich back the other direction as well. Maybe something like that works for both teams, trim some salary space for the Atlanta Hawks to be able to make some acquisitions and allows them to get a little bit younger while it pushes the chips forward for the Kings and allows them to move forward as well, maybe making a playoff spot, which they haven't done so in a number of years now. That's something that could work for both teams. Other trades that could be out there. For the Atlanta Hawks, they're never going to trade Trae Young. Never going to happen. Kevin Huerter's been rumored to be traded for a number of years. They just signed him to that extension, so we'll see what kind of value he ends up bringing to that team. He's at about a $14-15 million contract range over the next couple of years. So we'll see if he continues to stay on that roster, or do they finally trade in that chip, maybe get some young pieces back like they did with Cam Reddish when they flipped him to New York for a first-round pick. Lou Williams, of course, was the free agent anyway this year. Delon Wright was a free agent this year. So they got some depth issues anyway at the point guard position. Are they going to bring in somebody young? They're going to go the veteran route? Remains to be seen. Danilo Gallinari is going to be entering the final year of his deal with this team as well. I believe they won't be able to move that deal and be able to get pieces back for it. But maybe they could get involved in like a 3-team scenario, sending an expiring contract out, taking on some heavier dollars, that kind of thing. But it seems like they're more willing to trade to get out of money rather than take more on. Next team on the list is going to be the Boston Celtics. Boston was just in the NBA Finals. They have a lot of questions as far as, in my opinion, as far as what they're going to do with that point guard position. They tried a number of different things over the past couple of years, and none of them seem to have worked. They spent a lot of money on Derek White during the season in that trade. They took on Daniel Tice as well. They got a lot of 2s, 3s, and 4s type players, but they don't really have a 5 unless you count Al Horford. I still think he's more of a 4, just the way he plays. And then you also have at the point guard position Peyton Pritchard, White, and Marcus Smart, who have tried to hodgepodge that thing together. Maybe somebody who's more of a floor general in that role would be a little bit better fit there. Maybe you flip Derek White to kind of make the money work out. There's been rumors that they'd be willing to move on from a guy like Grant Williams, but he is entering the final year of his deal, and then he's got, of course, a team option after that, or qualifying offer anyway after that. So we'll see what ends up happening with Grant Williams, but maybe the trade that I mentioned earlier, the acquisition of the New York Knicks getting Jalen Brunson, there was rumored to be interest in Grant Williams going the opposite direction for a guy like Alec Burks. In my opinion, Grant Williams is by far the more superior player, and I don't see how the salaries work in a deal like that. So I don't see the framework, how it makes sense for both teams. But as far as what this team needs, in my opinion, is going to be a floor general first and foremost. Maybe a guy coming off injury like a Ricky Rubio, somebody like that would be of interest to them. They're also going to be up there against the tax anyway, if not over it. And so somebody who can fill in those shoes at an inexpensive price, if they choose to go the free agent route, might work out a little bit better in the long run for them. But thank you guys for joining us here at the Upside. There's quite a few teams to go through, so we'll try to go through each one of these line by line. We already kind of touched on the Brooklyn Nets anyway. Their biggest offseason questions is what they're going to do about Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is by far one of the best players in NBA history. Kyrie Irving is one of the more mercurial stars in NBA history. Definitely one of the best offensive players, ball handlers in the NBA right now. However, he doesn't play that often, and so that's kind of where your offseason starts. Now, he's already opted into his contract, so if you leave everything as is, we could roll the dice with what the roster was last year. But we saw how that worked. Boston wiped the floor with them. Kevin Durant struggled in the postseason because they weren't able to play together because Kyrie Irving was selfish all year round, lost $17 million in salary because he wouldn't get a shot. Now, whether or not you believe that was a good decision or a bad decision from a personal perspective or a medical perspective doesn't matter. Your employer was not able to use your services that he was or that you were contracted for. And so that's what cost the Nets this past season at any chance of making a finals run. This coming year, say Kyrie Irving is healthy and is a part of the team and is invested and is looking to get that next big deal, tries to rebuild his value again, try to get that max extension. That could work. Sure, you could get a better season out of Kyrie Irving. But even then, what are you going to do? You still haven't seen Ben Simmons. He hasn't played in over a year now. He has mental health issues and that kind of a thing. Now, whether or not you believe those are legitimate or if those are concocted just to try to get himself out of Philadelphia, that remains to be seen. But as far as the the trade of James Harden for Ben Simmons, that was not a trade to be, or that was made to improve their chances of winning that season. Ben Simmons is an investment in their future. He doesn't really have a jump shot. He's been working on it, but we'll see what kind of progress he's made when he finally takes the floor again. But we'll see if this team has anything going forward. If Kyrie Irving, if the rumors are out there that are true, that there's still momentum that he could go to LA, if he does go to LA, this thing is a total rebuild, gut everything, trade everything now, immediately, as fast as you possibly can. The best contract that the Brooklyn Nets have on their roster right now is Seth Curry. That contract was absolutely wonderful from a league or from a team perspective. He's only going to make $8.4 million this year, and he would be the perfect scorer at the shooting guard position without demanding a number of dollars and without demanding the ball the entire time. He can play off ball, he can play with the ball, just a great shooting guard. He is in line for a raise next offseason. This offseason, though, they got a few free agents that they need to worry about, namely Nick Claxton and Bruce Brown. Those two players, if they do decide to roll things back like they have right now, Bruce Brown is due for a raise. They're going to be a tax team if they choose to keep everybody on the roster. Patty Mills is in the final year of his deal. Nick Claxton is going to be in line for a massive raise after how he performed. You're probably looking $10+ million a year for him. So it remains to be seen if how far they're willing to go above the tax to be able to keep this team around. Next on the list is going to be the Charlotte Hornets. Now, the Hornets, their offseason has already started in my book because they already drafted Mark Williams to be the center of this team. They haven't really had that interior force down low. He could be that guy, but they still need to supplement it if they're going to do that route. The biggest story for them is going to be Miles Bridges. Are they willing to keep him around on a max offer? Mitch Kupchak, the GM anyway, just announced that basically they're going to make sure that happens. I think it was Mitch Kupchak. Anyway, they basically just announced that they're going to keep Miles Bridges. They have the ability to offer him the most money. They have offseason issues with Montrezl Harrell. He's going to be a free agent, so I don't expect him to re-sign there. He had some off-court issues this offseason, getting busted for drugs and that kind of a thing. I think he got busted for like 3 pounds of marijuana or something. Not something that you necessarily think of as the worst thing in the world, but it's not exactly something that speaks very highly to the type of player that you want hanging around your team as far as, what's going on with him off the field or off the court anyway. Like I said, not the worst thing in the world, but it's not necessarily a signifying characteristic that says, hey, I'm on the up and up. Mason Plumlee is in the final year of his deal. He's going to probably be a part of that big man rotation. But like I said, somebody like a Kevon Looney coming in here to kind of split rotation minutes with Mark Williams would be very nice for them. But the biggest option is going to be Miles Bridges, bringing him back. P.J. Washington's going to be in the final year of his deal. Kelly Oubre as well. The biggest contract they have right now is Gordon Hayward. I see a lot of you guys out there trying to trade away Gordon Hayward. My question is, what are you going to get in return for him? When he's on the floor, he's a very good player. When he's off the floor, it's usually because he's injured. Injuries are a part of it, but because of those injuries and that salary, I just don't see where you're moving him. Maybe you move him to like the Lakers for a Russell Westbrook just to get out of the money a year early, but that Russell Westbrook trade doesn't help this Charlotte Hornets team, and it doesn't say much that you trade away your number one free agent acquisition ever in order to clear off money. So maybe holding on to a guy like Gordon Hayward is what's best for a team like this. But let us know in the comment section what you think. Where do you think the DeAndre Ayton sweepstakes end up? Maybe this is a team that could push their chips to the center, trade away a Mark Williams along with some salary out the other way in order to get a Miles Bridges and DeAndre Ayton stack and play him with LaMelo Ball and just see how things work out. That'd be kind of an interesting acquisition if they were able to pull something like that. We touched on the Bulls a little bit in our earlier video, kind of going over the Zach LaVine option, how they kind of invested heavily in this team by DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso. The biggest improvement I'm going to see on this team is going to come from their young guys, Patrick Williams and Kobe White. Both of those, if they're able to take the next step in their career, this team will be much better for it. If they are unable to do any better than what they've done so far, then this team is going to be about where they have been the entire time. They're going to be 5th, 6th, 7th seed. They're going to be bounced in the first round, and we're going to be going around, well, they got really nice pieces. They got a really good, solid team. They got defenders with Caruso and Williams. They got offense with DeRozan, LaVine, and Vucevic, but they don't really have that number one killer. LaVine is their best player, and I don't think he's a 1A. I think he's a 1B, maybe even a 2 on a title team. So with that said, LaVine may go out the door just to kind of see what else is out there. But for the most money that he can get in his career, he's coming off a $19.5 million contract, 7 years in the NBA. He's 26 years old. This is his one chance to really kind of cash in. And so he probably ends up back with the Bulls. Cleveland Cavaliers have a couple of different questions to answer. First is going to be the Colin Sexton question. He was injured along with Ricky Rubio. Both players played very well for Cleveland last year before their injuries. Jarrett Allen had an injury just before the postseason started and tried to pull it out, but you saw how well he played in the regular season versus what he was like in the postseason. There just wasn't anything left in the tank for him. And so that's why a player like Jarrett Allen, with being a lot healthier going into the next season, I don't expect them to move him. Kevin Love is on an expiring deal, $28.9 million contract this year. Maybe they buy him out, but I think they might use that as a trade chip to be able to bring in a bigger contract. Maybe if you're a Dallas Maverick fan, maybe this is the trade that gets you off years of money with a guy like Bertans and maybe Harvey going the other way. And that allows the Cleveland Cavaliers to get their young shooting guard, and that would allow them to move on from Colin Sexton. Now, Hardaway is coming off of injury himself, but you already know what his number is going to be. You don't really know what a Colin Sexton's going to go for in this market. There's not a lot of money out there, so maybe he doesn't go for a lot. But in either event, maybe you flip an asset like a Kevin Love expiring contract into something a little bit more valuable. Karis LeVert's also entering his final year of his deal. I fully expect them to try to extend that deal, though. That should be very easy for them to do. He performed well with them there. They just didn't know really how to incorporate him in the offense. So with a full offseason, I fully expect them to solve those problems. Lauri Markkanen, they like to play him at the 3. He's more of a 4. So by getting somebody smaller like a Tim Hardaway Jr. would allow him to play more at his natural position a little bit more. And Evan Mobley was, in my opinion, probably the rookie of the year, or at least should have been. Another year of his development. Anything that you can do to get him more minutes and clearing out Kevin Love would allow him to play more minutes. That should be great for his career and his development. Darius Garland needs to be signed to that extension. He's going to be entering the final year of his deal coming up anyway. He's got a $26.7 million qualifying offer the following year, but maybe a guy like Garland gets 20 plus, maybe even gets 25 plus based on how well he performed for them. And then, of course, we mentioned Colin Sexton. He's 23 years old. He is coming off of injury. He was the better player between Garland and Sexton a year ago. Is that still the case? I don't believe so. I think Garland really took a step this year because of the minutes and the ability of him to be able to play as the primary ball handler without having to have Colin Sexton run the offense for a larger period of time. I just think they're just not really a fit anymore for Colin Sexton on this team anyway. I think that ship has sailed. Next on the list is going to be to the Dallas Mavericks. Now, as I've already mentioned numerous times on many of my videos, the Dallas Mavericks are, of course, my favorite team, so I got a little bit more invested, I guess you could say, in this one. The contract of Jalen Brunson was a bargain for all those years. They should have signed him to an extension before the season, but even then, an extension of 4 years, $55 million looked like a lot for a player who was not able to get on the floor in a playoff series. This year, though, performed really well, admirably. We already talked about a lot of that. But the thing I want to focus on here is what happens if Brunson is back and what happens if Brunson is gone. If Brunson is back, maybe you move on from a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie and acquire a wing that's able to play some minutes, that kind of a thing. But you really enjoyed the three ball handler group that they had. In either case, if they lose Brunson or if they keep Brunson, I expect Dragic to be brought in as kind of that friend to Luka Doncic that can also play minutes on the floor. Boban wasn't able to play minutes on the floor anymore. His knees just aren't there anymore. And so when they traded him away, along with a number of other players, to bring in a guy like Christian Wood, who can play that five position instead of Dwight Powell, they now have a little bit better front court, but they need to kind of improve their ball handling again after sending out a couple of their young guards. So getting a guy like Goran Dragic now makes sense. Maybe give him the full $6.5 million taxpayer mid-level exception. And if you do that, you can fill out the rest of the roster with minimum contract guys. Then the best way to improve your team outside of Brunson is going to be via trade. If you do the sign-in trade with Brunson with the Knicks, you get back maybe a Nerlens Noel that solves your five position while bringing in maybe a first-round pick, your own first-round pick back from 2023. And then you have your full complement of picks back that you can move forward and try to get the next star that's unhappy in their situation. One thing that Nico Harrison said, the general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, when he took the job, is that they're now going to have a seat at the table with every player in the league. No matter what their situation is, they at least will be heard out in every single room. That wasn't necessarily the case when Dirk was on the team. Dirk was an aging veteran player when they were trying to lure in top free agents, and it just wasn't that appealing for a guy to come in with a 35-year-old veteran who owned the town. Luka Doncic owns the town. However, he's only like 22, 23 years old. He's an exemplary young player. Other players around him, look at Tim Hardaway Jr., the career year that he had in order to get that contract that he has now. Look at Jalen Brunson and what it's done for his career to play next to a guy like Luka Doncic. He's going to get about $100 million a year because of being able to play next to Luka Doncic and the performance that he had this year. Maxi Kleber got a 4-year deal because of that. He's in the final year of that. Dwight Powell got the same kind of a contract. He makes other players money. Now, does that entice other big players to come to them? Maybe not during free agency because obviously they don't have cap space. But now maybe when players demand a trade, we just saw Kyrie listed 6 teams that he was interested in going to. The Dallas Mavericks were one of them. Maybe they can work out a trade with Dinwiddie and Bertans going the other way and a first-round pick, and maybe Kyrie coming back the other way, maybe getting back a Seth Curry as well. Something like that works. Other trades that are out there, maybe a Kevin Love deal to get off the long-term money of a Bertans or a Hardaway. That would free up cap space to go after a top free agent in the next offseason. Those are some of the acquisitions that I would be interested in if I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan. But for my money, the biggest for sure thing that you can count on right now is Goran Dragic will be a member of the Dallas Mavericks. Finally, after 2 years of trying to get him on here, that they're finally going to be able to do it. The expiring contract of a Dwight Powell makes sense to be able to move him now that you have Christian Wood. I don't expect them to move a guy like Maxi Kleber unless they're able to get a shot blocking, three-point shooter, that kind of player to kind of back up that 5-4 position. The ability to shoot the three, he's kind of a hot and cold shooter during the playoffs, but we saw how effective he was. Christian Wood was brought in to kind of solidify that 5 position. Now, he's not going to be able to hold up defensively against the likes of a Rudy Gobert or a DeAndre Ayton, but against teams in the playoffs when they like to go smaller, he is going to be the ideal 5 for you. So maybe you bring in somebody who can take those 5 minutes against those bigger guys and at least hold up for 10, 20 minutes a game in those type of situations. But you're not looking to spend $40 million at the position. So get the idea of getting a guy like Rudy Gobert out of your mind. Other players on this team that could hold value for other teams on a trade. Josh Green, he's got 2 years left on his deal. He's probably the only young player on this team that they're willing to move on from. Jaden Hardy, they just acquired in the second round. They thought really highly of him. Shot selection is going to be key for him if he can improve that. Think of him as kind of a young Seth Curry. How Seth Curry started out in the G League and kind of moved forward from there. That's kind of the career path I see for Jaden Hardy, except with maybe a little bit more of a ceiling, a little bit higher of a ceiling than, say, a Seth Curry. Towards the back end of the roster, well, not back end, but at the very end of the roster anyway, we still have Dorian Finney-Smith. He's going to probably be your 3-4 starter this year. Signed a great contract, a 4-year, $55 million deal, high character guy. If you do acquire a star player, say LeBron wants out and LA needs something back, he may be required to make a trade like that happen. If Kevin Durant, for some reason, says, I want to go to Dallas and Dallas only, Never going to happen, by the way. But if it did, maybe he's a piece that would at least make it a little bit more palatable for the Nets to go along with, say, 3 first-round picks, pick swaps, a couple other young pieces, and then you make the best of it from there. But that's kind of where things stand with the Dallas Mavericks. Their first-round pick is taken in 2023 by the New York Knicks. It is lottery pick protected anyway. So maybe, like I said, if Jalen Brunson does decide to take the contract with the Knicks, maybe work out a sign and trade and at least get your draft pick capital back and kind of solve that problem there. If you do lose Jalen Brunson, maybe you do hold on to a Spencer Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie's contract is non-guaranteed for next year. So is Bertans a year after that, I believe. But I think he's only got $5 million guaranteed to that final year. So it's really a 2-year, $37 million deal left for Bertans. So maybe a trade, like I mentioned, of a Kevin Love would make sense for them. All righty. So with that said, let's move on to the Denver Nuggets. Denver, of course, has the 2-time MVP in Nikola Jokic. He is entering the final year of his contract. This team is going to sink or swim, essentially, based on that Michael Porter Jr. contract. If that contract is able to have him on the floor, healthy, not needing back surgery, not in the weight room trying to build up strength while he recovers from yet another injury, maybe something like that works for them. Will Barton is entering the final year of his deal, so this is kind of a make-or-break year for them. They really need to push the envelope. If they're unable to get out of the first round of the playoffs this year, I fully expect Jokic to be willing to move elsewhere if he doesn't sign an extension this offseason. If he does sign an extension this offseason and they get bounced in the first round, maybe you're looking at a trade to the likes of Zach Lowe's mentions of Kevin Durant. Maybe you're looking at a trade like that where it really takes a haul to be able to get a player like that to your team. But for right now, they're going to kind of hold pat and see what happens. They get a lot of good young ball handlers to kind of put around Nikola Jokic. They also have Aaron Gordon still. They signed him to an extension last offseason. Very solid player for them. Averages about $21.5 million over the lifetime of this contract. We'll see how good of a contract this works out to be if they keep Jokic. If they don't keep Jokic, he's also probably going to be out the door right after that. But that Denver Nuggets, I don't see them doing much unless they make some big changes with that Michael Porter Jr. contract, and I just don't see a team willing to take on that money or that kind of a risk. The Detroit Pistons, of course, traded away Jeremy Grant to the Portland Trail Blazers. They got some picks back. They still have the highest paid player on their roster right now is going to be Kelly Olynyk at 12.8, so they got a lot of money that they can use. They do need a big man. They do need another point guard that can play next to Cade Cunningham. It's all about his development and moving him forward and taking the reins as the best player on their team. If he's not the best player on this team is going to be languishing in mediocrity for a number of years. So they really need to kind of build something around him and and at least give other teams another player to look at defensively rather than just attacking Cade Cunningham. Cunningham did struggle in his rookie season. However, he did have his flashes of brilliance, but they really need to improve that roster around him. Jeremy Grant, while a nice player for them, was overpaid at the time when the contract was signed. He did grow into that contract, however, but they need to kind of improve this team as a whole around him. So getting a player like a Brunson or a DeAndre Ayton would make a lot of sense. Do I expect them to get either one? No, but they do have a lot of money that they can use to try to get some of those smaller free agents that are out there. There's quite a few out there. There's not a lot of teams with money, and they're going to be able to have their pick of who they really want on this team. Maybe they go after a guy like Gary Payton Jr. to play defense next to a Cade Cunningham. Maybe they go after a guy like Zach LaVine and say, hey, Cade Cunningham and you are really athletic. We can have something going there. Not going to happen, but maybe they can try. Small forward, maybe they get a guy like Kyle Anderson to kind of take that role of a Jeremy Grant last year and improve his IQ on the floor, try to make Cade Cunningham a smarter basketball player. Maybe they bring in a guy like Otto Porter Jr. coming off a title with the Golden State Warriors. Maybe they offer him more money again. TJ Warren's coming off of injury, but he's a great offensive small forward. That type of a player is usually what you're going to be looking at. There's not too much outside of that on the free agent market. It's kind of a bear market this year for free agency. That's why the majority of the fun is going to be had in trades and that kind of a thing. Now, maybe Detroit takes on an expiring deal like a Russell Westbrook, takes on picks and kind of moves their timeline forward, but I don't really expect them to do that with a Cade Cunningham. Think of what the Mavericks did with Luka Doncic in the first couple of years that he was in Dallas. Maybe they do something like that, try to piecemeal the thing together, get good, cheap contracts for good quality players, Seth Curry, Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell, players like that around Luka Doncic that got good money, but not great money. Something like that would work great around a Cade Cunningham. That way they can easily flip those contracts later on for bigger and better players and trade those picks off later on as well. But that's kind of where things stand with the Detroit Pistons. Golden State Warriors just came off a title yet again, fourth title for Seth Curry for Steph Curry, excuse me. Klay Thompson was back, was healthy for the first time really towards the end of the year. Looked a little bit more like the old Klay defensively anyway. Offense was there for most of the season, but was just inconsistent. But defensively, he was finally able to get that mobility back. He is 31 now, so they do have a little bit of an issue coming up as to what they're going to do financially. Wiggins is in the final year of his deal. They've already expressed interest in wanting to keep him, but they're not going to be able to pay everybody. They're going to have to decide what they're going to want to do to pay these people. They got a lot of good young talent on their roster now as well. Kuminga, Wiseman, Moody, those type of players. Gary Payton, the second anyway, was a free agent this year. Jordan Poole, he's entering the final year of his deal, I believe, as a second round pick. So we'll see what they end up deciding to do, if they decide to turn the page entirely to the young guys or they still keep the team around as a whole. There's not too much headlines that the Warriors can make. They're probably going to lose Looney in free agency, as I mentioned earlier, but maybe they're able to hold on to a guy like Gary Payton Jr. or Gary Payton anyway, and then move forward from there. Maybe they bring in some veteran minimum guys, Andre Iguodala type guys, leadership, character, those kinds of things. Maybe a guy on a cheap contract like an Otto Porter Jr. who's willing to sacrifice some money now to be able to get a title and play for a winning team. That type of player is what the Warriors are going to be looking at this offseason again. Now, the Houston Rockets are the next team. They just sent away Christian Wood to the Dallas Mavericks in a 4-for-1 deal that gave them the 26th pick that they turned around and traded for the 29th and a future assets as well. The one player that's making the most money on the roster right now is Eric Gordon. He's the only one over $10 million at $19.5 million. His next year is non-guaranteed as well, so it's really more of a one-year deal. Contenders are always in the hunt for shooting. He is a great three-point shooter. He did not have a great year last year. Has missed time over the past couple of years due to injury. But again, how much of that is playing for a poor team and not really willing to push it when you have to push through injury? They do have free agents in Schroeder as well who could come back. They were wanting to free up front court space anyway for Sengun to be able to get more minutes, is why they sent away Wood. Wood is a very good, high-quality big, so they're going to miss him and his production on this team. Kevin Porter showed some strides last year for the Rockets as well, kind of stepped forward along with Jayshawn Tate. We'll see if they can continue their development. And they just got Smith out of the draft as well, Jabari Smith anyway, so he's probably going to start next to Jalen Green. That's your starting foundation, building block type pieces that they need. And they still have basically the entire Brooklyn Nets future from now on. So if Brooklyn decides to blow it up, think of how good the Boston Celtics were able to handle that situation. The Rockets are now in that type of situation thanks to the Nets yet again. But again, expect Eric Gordon to be traded very shortly. Indiana Pacers are probably the team most likely to trade away some pieces. They have a number of high-priced guys in a rebuild that they need to move on from. Buddy Hield they acquired in that bonus deal, making $21 million this year, $19 million next year. Somebody like that is always going to be coveted on playoff teams. Kind of a volume scorer, can get hot and stay hot and get you 30 a night sometimes. Other times he's going to miss the broadside of a barn. He's going to get you 2 points on 15 shots. It's just the way it goes with shooters sometimes. He's a little bit more streaky than others, so maybe that gives some pause to teams that are willing to invest $20 million in a player. But if you're trying to find that final piece, getting somebody like this to come off your bench or maybe play that two-guard position, if you have that hole in your lineup, he'd be a great piece for you. The best piece, in my opinion, that they have to trade is Malcolm Brogdon. Miles Turner might be able to fetch them more if he had a bigger contract and wasn't coming off of injury, but he's only got 1 year left. They're only going to get maybe a first round pick for him, maybe a young guy along with that, maybe an expiring contract just to kind of clear money off the books. But the biggest piece is Malcolm Brogdon. He's just signed that extension, the past offseason anyway. So he's got 3 years left, including this year anyway. He's a very good point guard. Dallas would love to have somebody like this if they lose Jalen Brunson. Think of him as kind of the Jalen Brunson, but a little bit more efficient, kind of that 40, 50, 90 guy, 40 from three-point range, 50 from 50, 40, 90, excuse me, 50 from two-point range, 40 from three-point range, and 90% from the free throw line. He does put in effort on the defensive end of the floor. The one issue in his game right now is injury. He did miss some time over the past couple of years. That's the only thing that might hold back his trade value. If the Knicks lose out on a guy like Brunson, look for the Knicks and a team like the Washington Wizards, who really need to improve that point guard position next to Bradley Beal, as the target for them. TJ Warren is probably the biggest free agent that they have on the market right now. I don't expect him to re-sign with the Indiana Pacers. Think of him as a guy that could go to the Portland Trail Blazers to kind of soak up some of that salary cap space, play next to a Damian Lillard. If things don't work out for Damian Lillard this year, I fully expect them to be willing, or him to be willing to accept a trade somewhere, maybe even ask for one. Lillard and Bradley Beal have both been long thought of as guys that wanted to stay in their current situation if they can make it work. Both haven't been able to make it work as of yet. First round playoff exits and missing the playoffs entirely is what they've been stuck with due to, well, them just being stuck into those positions. Their contracts not working out, players that they do acquire not working out. Dinwiddie didn't work in with the Wizards, but he is working with Doncic. Players pay attention to stuff like that. One player failing in one place moves to a different situation and succeeds. Players notice that kind of a thing. Now, of course, the headline for Portland was that they wanted to get, or that Damian Lillard posted out an image of him and Kevin Durant. That's never going to happen. Basically, everybody laughed that one off. But players that help improve the team, like a TJ Warren, are going to help make Portland's case better to keep a guy like Damian Lillard. Other teams that could be interested, I don't expect him to sign for a mid-level exception. I certainly don't expect him to sign for a tax mid-level exception. But teams with cap space, maybe a team like Orlando who needs some scoring punch, see the benefit in adding a guy like TJ Warren. Tyrese Halliburton was the addition that they got for Sabonis this past off, or during the season anyway. He's going to take over that position, or that point guard position. He is a fantastic player. I fully expect him to get many All-Star nods. Is unselfish with the ball. Rick Carlisle really wanted him when he was with the Dallas Mavericks in the draft. They weren't able to trade up from 18, where they selected Josh Green, all the way up to number 11, where the Kings got him, maybe even a little ahead of that. They just weren't able to get something done like that. Just imagine what a backcourt of Luka Doncic and Tyrese Halliburton would look like if they had been able to swing that trade. Wow. But Tyrese Halliburton's going to take over the point there. There at the beginning of the offseason, or last offseason anyway, there was some rumors that maybe Jalen Brunson could be had by the Pacers if they're willing to take on a little bit more money, that kind of a thing. Jalen Brunson's contract is going to way outpace what the Pacers are going to be willing to do, and so I don't expect them to be a player for him. They do have a lot of good young players that they need to find minutes for. Goga Bidazzi is one of them. Chris Duarte in his second year is going to need some minutes as well, and they just brought in the forward from Arizona. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, with the number 6 pick in the draft. But they're going to need to find minutes at the wing, so they're going to have to trade off a couple of these pieces and maybe get some future assets for them. Next on the list is going to be the Clippers. We already discussed some of the headlines the Clippers have made. Just recently, they just announced that they're going to sign Ivica Zubac to a 3-year contract extension worth $33 million. So that's going to be $11 million guaranteed annually. They do have a number of big, hefty contracts already on their books, locked up for a number of years. Luke Kennard, Norman Powell, Marcus Morris Jr., Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, those type of players. Terrence Mann is locked up. They got him on a great deal, great pest on defense, and can score when needed. They do have a couple of young guys as well at the end of their bench, but they've got a lot of money tied up in Powell, Morris, Leonard, Kennard, George, those type of players, and now Zubac. They just brought in John Wall on a $6.5 million mid-level tax exemption. Uh, if they decide to trade away some salary, the guys that they'd most likely move, Luke Kennard and Marcus Morris, I don't expect them to do so. I expect them to pay the tax. Steve Ballmer's willing to pay the tax for an exemplary team, and getting a guy like Kawhi Leonard healthy again was their priority this season. Next year, they should be competing for a title. They're going to be fantastic now that they have a point guard to actually distribute the ball and make that offense flow a lot better. Defensively, you have Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Marcus Morris. Those three guys can switch on pretty much any position, be able to guard them 1 through 5. And yes, I do think Kawhi can guard a 5 if he has to. But this team is going to be a lot more well-rounded now that they're not going to have to rely on Reggie Jackson to be able to distribute the ball to all their shot makers. One player that they did have on a two-way contract, Amir Coffey, I'm curious to see what ends up happening with him. He showed a lot of promise last year for them. Personally, I'm kind of hoping Dallas is willing to invest some money in him, give him a roster spot. Kind of gives you that length that you need, 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", somewhere in there, I think is what he was. And he was shooting, I think, 40% from three or close to it last year, 48, I think, from the field, and I think 85% from the free throw line. He played very well, and for a two-way contract guy, he played so well. I'm very curious to see what kind of market he has. Think of him as this year's Christian Wood from a couple of years ago. Christian Wood was a unknown commodity, bounced around the G League and Summer League camps for a while until he was finally able to get some success with Detroit during the second half of 1 year. In the second half of that year, that was able to propel him to get $13 million a year over 3 years with the Houston Rockets. Something like that could happen for Amir Coffey if there's a team that's out there that notices that type of production on a team like the Clippers that was without Kawhi Leonard. The Lakers, we've kind of touched on their options. They really don't have many. They need to fill out their bench with minimum contract guys. They got to find a way to either, one, work with Westbrook on the roster, but it seems like they've already relegated him to a bench role. Darvin Ham is the new coach there for them. LeBron James is entering the final year of his deal. He's eligible for a 2-year, $97 million contract extension at the end, or on August 9th, or when he's eligible for that. They do have 3 other players under contract: Anthony Davis, Taylor Horton-Tucker, Kendrick Nunn, and Austin Reeves. Sorry, I forgot about him. But those are kind of your young guys that you have to bank on if you're a Lakers fan. For my money, they have way too much money invested in Taylor Horton-Tucker. They need to move his contract as well. He just didn't live up to it. They invested too much money too early in a guy that they were really hoping and praying on rather than production. Russell Westbrook, $47 million this year he just opted into. If they can move that for big contracts, for players who can actually play, maybe like a Dallas Mavericks trade of Davis Bertans and Tim Hardaway Jr. Notice how I'm kind of throwing that package together. If you have an expiring contract, Dallas is probably looking to get out of those long-term contracts. And if you can flip a guy like a Russell Westbrook and a pick, maybe you're able to make something like that happen. Malik Monk, of course, came over on the vet minimum contract of $1.6 million. He was probably their third best player last year. Honestly, their second best player when you consider that Anthony Davis didn't play much. But he played very well for them. We'll see what kind of contract that gets him. He said he's willing to take a discount to stay with the Lakers. So if you're a Lakers fan, good on you. However, you really don't have much outside of that. You're looking at more Kent Bazemore, Avery Bradley, Carmelo Anthony, Wayne Ellington, Dwight Howard, players like that. That's the type of player you're going to be in the market for. You're not going to be able to play for the tax mid-level unless you're willing to really step out and go after one of these guys. I think the Lakers are going to try to trim some payroll, and eventually they're going to have to decide if they want to trade LeBron James or give him that contract extension. You already know my thoughts on it. They should have traded James already, but now that the time is here, I think this is kind of your best last opportunity to trade him. You're not going to get much at the deadline for him. As good a name recognition as LeBron is, he is much older than you think he is. He's 37 years old, about to be 38 years old. He's got 19 years in the NBA. You think he's willing to take a back seat to a guy who doesn't want to play basketball, doesn't live, eat, and breathe basketball, and Anthony Davis? I don't see that happening. And this could come to a head sooner than later if they're unable to find somebody else to find or to take up that Russell Westbrook contract. Next is going to be the Memphis Grizzlies. From a team with a very bleak future to a team with a very bright future. They have a lot of picks going forward. They have flexibility. They got a young point guard and John Morant on a good contract, $12 million this year, and then he's got that extension coming soon, hopefully. Still only 22, 23 years old. Dylan Brooks really kind of came into his own 2 years ago anyway. missed some time due to injury last year. The one bad contract they do have is Steven Adams, but that's an expiring deal. They just traded away DeAnthony Melton for a pick and Danny Green. Danny Green's probably going to be bought out. I don't expect him to be around much. Tyus Jones is going to be a free agent for them. They should look to bring him back. He played very well when John Morant lost or was out of the lineup. Brandon Clark is also going to be a free agent at the end of this year anyway. Desmond Bane was the acquisition that the Memphis Grizzlies had when Dallas selected Josh Green. Then Desmond Bane was selected later on. That when the Dallas Mavericks and the Memphis Grizzlies faced each other earlier this year, Desmond Bane put up like 30 points in the game, and then after the game he was quoted saying, "Well, I don't even know who they drafted before me. Did he even play in the game?" And you look at the stat sheet, and no, he did not. Basically, from that moment on, Dallas made a concerted effort to try to get Josh Green in the lineup, but Desmond Bane was clearly the better player and remains so right now. He was a great shooter in college, and he's been a great shooter in the NBA. Defensively, he leaves a little bit to be desired, but you can't expect the world out of every young player that comes into the NBA. But he's a great shooter to put next to John Morant. Jaren Jackson Jr. just signed that massive contract extension that actually declines in value as it goes on. This coming year, it's going to be worth $28.9 million. That's a massive hit for a guy who struggled to find consistency through injury, to finding his space on the team, that kind of a thing. But he's still a very talented young player, and he fits very well with this young group. We'll see what ends up happening there. Brandon Clark probably is going to have to move on because his role is kind of duplicated in Jaren Jackson. They got Xavier Tillman as well. So they got some players who can take his minutes, and they drafted a bunch of young guys who are going to take some of those minutes anyway. So they have a lot of assets to try to build up and move forward and maybe acquire a star. A team like, say, like the Phoenix Suns, who need to move on from a DeAndre Ayton, or at least not willing to pay him a max contract. Maybe they package a guy like Steven Adams and Clark and maybe a Dylan Brooks, and they get like a DeAndre Ayton back for it. That would be a great move for the Memphis Grizzlies, being able to move their chips to the center and try to consolidate some of their assets. They have a very bright future, all thanks to John Morant. The Miami Heat, what can you say about them? They always seem to find the good minimum level contract that outperforms, and then they have them on for a few more years. They did get Kyle Lowry this past offseason. However, he had some injury issues and performance wasn't necessarily as well as advertised anyway when he was a free agent. They do have a lot of money tied up in Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and Duncan Robinson. Tyler Hero's entering the final year of his deal. So if you're going to try to go after a guy like, say, a Kyrie Irving, maybe you package together Hero, Lowry, and a pick, and you go get Kyrie Irving. I don't see him fitting in the Miami culture, though, as far as that team. This is a very defensive-oriented team. Kyrie Irving is not, but he would be a much better scorer than anything they have on their roster right now. Players that they have options on, Gabe Vincent anyway, and Max Strus. Those contracts are non-guaranteed. Both of those are only $1.8 million, and both of those played heavy minutes for them in the postseason. They played very well for them as well. So we'll see if they're able to kind of get more out of those minimum level contracts again. Udonis Haslem, yes, that Udonis Haslem is still in the NBA. He's more of a player coach at this point, doesn't really get into games, but he's able to kind of link the message from Eric Spoelstra and management down to the players on the court. So he's a very good ambassador. Think of players like Rajon Rondo, that type of player, JJ Barea, if you're a Maverick fan in the past, that type of player is able to kind of relay the message between the two and kind of build that chemistry as a group. The Milwaukee Bucks are the next team on the list anyway. They just had a title a year ago anyway. Giannis finally was able to make good. He's only 27 years old, lots of money tied up in him. Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday as well. There's been rumors that they're looking to get off the money of Brook Lopez for years now. I still don't expect them to trade him, though. He just fits too well with what they want to do. He's on an expiring deal anyway. Serge Ibaka, that trade just did not work out for them as far as depth at that position goes. Bobby Portis is due for a raise. So we'll see if they're able to get him a raise. Pat Connaughton played very well for them as well. The Antetokounmpo brothers are still there. Grayson Allen performed well. He's finally been able to find a home in the NBA, kind of a shooter. He's not much of a defender at all, but at $8.5 million for a guy who can come in and give you 10, 15, maybe 20 on a really good night, that's a really good bench piece to have, somebody who can shoot the three very well. But Milwaukee, as far as free agency, what are they going to do? Not much. Their priority is going to be Bobby Portis and filling out that roster. Maybe they sign like a veteran guy at the point, like a DJ Augustine, to take over for George Hill. Maybe they sign a backup center. Maybe invest that 6.5 taxpayer exemption in a guy like Kevon Looney. Something like that to kind of give them minutes at the backup five. Minnesota Timberwolves, there's been rumors for years that they're going to blow it up and blow it up and blow it up. Well, they finally made the postseason, and they acted like they won the Super Bowl. Okay, that was a little over the top. But they finally did make the postseason, were able to get some victories there. A lot of youth, a lot of energy now in the Minnesota Timberwolves organization. However, it looks like they may still be willing to move on from a guy like D'Angelo Russell, who's in the final year of his contract. Flipping him for future assets might work a little bit better for them, but they've been building for the future for a number of years. Flipping him for somebody who makes sense now, a star that wants to come in, somebody who can be like a hired gun even, that can come in and take you past the first round of the playoffs, is that next step for this organization. Karl Anthony Towns has 2 years left on his deal. Malik Beasley as well. Anthony Edwards as well. This team is going to have to make a push this year in order to really solidify their future and be able to sign those players to extensions. So I expect them to try to do something with that D'Angelo Russell contract and try to bring in somebody that then they can move forward with and have a longer future than they would with D'Angelo Russell. A lot of young players on this team. Jared Vanderbilt, sorry. Jaden McDaniels as well, Bolmaro. They got a lot of young guys that need minutes, so moving on from some of their pieces could work to their advantage as well, trying to consolidate that talent. There's been rumors for years that they would want to get rid of Anthony Towns, but that's not going to happen. He does struggle in certain situations in the postseason. As we've seen, he kind of shrinks under the spotlight in certain instances, but he's going to have to solve that problem. He's 26 years old. He's now gotten a taste of the playoffs. Maybe having finally gotten there, maybe that'll move him forward in his career and get him over some things. He's had a lot of off-the-court tragedies over the past 2 years. My condolences to the Towns family. And he's a great individual off the court. But this team needs to move forward, and they're going to have to figure out something in the postseason. But like I said, it all starts and ends with that D'Angelo Russell contract. What are they going to end up doing with that? There's rumors that they might flip it for a John Collins. That would make sense. Somebody who can play the front court along with Towns, gives them more of an offensive punch, and allows their younger guys to kind of fill in the roles there. Allows Malik Beasley to be on the court in those closing game situations when you need a score. The New Orleans Pelicans are the next on the list. It's all about Zion's health. If they're able to get him back healthy and get a ball handler, this team should take off. If they're unable to get a ball handler, they did draft one, I believe, in the draft, however. But if they're unable to get somebody to be the primary ball handler and be able to distribute the ball when and where they need it to go, this team is going to struggle yet again, even with Zion being back. They've invested a lot of money in it. They've invested in Brandon Ingram, Devontae Graham. They've got Zion Williamson to worry about, who's entering the final year of his deal. He's probably going to sign a max contract extension just to kind of scoop up some of the money. But when healthy, he's a very good player. The question is, when is he going to be healthy? Devontae Graham has been rumored to be on the block. They were unable to move him at the deadline. Maybe a team who misses out on getting a point guard, say like the Washington Wizards, if they're unable to get a point guard in free agency or trade for one, maybe they look to Devontae Graham and take over their ball handling responsibilities next to a guy like Bradley Beal. From a big man perspective, they got Larry Nance still on their roster, high energy guy. Injured most of the year last year, finally was able to get healthy just in time for the postseason, and we saw how good of a postseason he had. He is 29, entering his age 30 season. He's getting a little bit older, so you're probably going to be looking around another 4-year, $36 million contract, something like that for Larry Nance after this following season. Beyond that, they got a couple of good young players to perform this past year. Trey Murphy III and Herbert Jones were able to play premium minutes in the postseason for the Pelicans. Willie Green really had this team turned around, so we'll see if they can continue to take that next step as a franchise. The New York Knicks, we've kind of covered a little bit. They have a lot of options to go forward. The biggest question for them is if they're going to be able to sign Jalen Brunson. I believe they'll end up getting him. As much as a Maverick fan as I am, I do believe that the Knicks are just going to be able to lure him away due to the family connections that he has. I do think that he's probably going to end up there via sign and trade, though, just to kind of be able to move those pieces around a little easier. I don't think New York's going to be able to find a trade partner to be able to move off enough salary to give them the salary or the contract offer that they want to extend to Jalen Brunson. So that's why the trade route, sign and trade route, makes a little bit more sense to me. Trading a guy like a Nerlens Noel and an Alec Burks away to the Dallas Mavericks along with a pick makes a little bit more sense. Maybe it takes a couple of extra second round picks in there, gets future assets for the Mavericks, and allows them to fill some holes as well, while the Knicks are able to get their guy at the point. The one contract, well, two contracts they really regret are going to be the Evan Fournier contract and the um, Julius Randle contract. They do have to pay Cam Reddish coming up and RJ Barrett. Now, remember, Zion is out there, so there's always the conversation of whether or not they go after him in free agency next year. So that remains to be seen if they decide to go after him. Mitchell Robinson is a restricted free agent this year. Maybe a sign and trade involving him would be an option as well to kind of get some talent back. Taj Gibson, one of my favorite players in the NBA for a number of years, just because he kind of puts the hard hat on. He's that type of a player, and he's always done the dirty work. He's played well with Thibodeau, or in Thibodeau's system for a number of years. That's why he went to New York to begin with. And so maybe he comes back on with his non-guaranteed deal this year, and if they're able to get that sign and trade worked out. Outside of that, I don't see the Knicks doing too much. If they're unable to get Jalen Brunson, maybe they pivot to another point guard, say like Ricky Rubio, to come in and at least take a couple of minutes from Emmanuel quickly. Maybe they go the trade route for Devontae Graham. Maybe they turn to Kyrie Irving and say, hey, we freed up all this cap space. Do you want to walk into it? Something like that. Oklahoma City's the next on the list. They got a number of young guys on their roster now. However, they don't have the ability to take on those massive contracts right now. They only have the big contract of Derek Favors to really send the other way. The extension for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander kicks in this year as well. That's why they can't really take on that $45 or $47 million contract of a Russell Westbrook and kind of eat it and take on draft picks. But something like that has always been their MO. Maybe they go a little bit smaller route this time and maybe take on a smaller contract in the $15 to $20 million contract range and get younger as well. They got a lot of youth on this team. Maybe they go the veteran route in free agency as far as supplementing this roster. Maybe a Wesley Matthews Jr. to kind of give them some veteran leadership on the guard side of the ball. They still have Derek Favors. If they trade away Derek Favors, maybe they bring in a guy on a one-year deal that's a veteran as a big man, maybe a Kevon Looney to kind of give them some leadership up front. But this team is going to be led by Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey. They also got Chet Holmgren in the draft. They got a number of good young players in the draft. This team is going to be very good for a number of years, and they still have a number of draft picks to go forward with as well. The Orlando Magic, they drafted Banchero in the draft. They needed a scorer, and they got a scorer, somebody who can get their own bucket. Jonathan Isaac is going to be coming back from injury. How does he look coming back from injury? They've struggled with their draft picks in recent years. Jalen Suggs did not have a good first year at all. He is only 20 years old, so he does have time to recover. But this team needs somebody to lead from a scoring perspective. Terrence Ross had a major step back this year in his career. That's why they were offering him at the draft for a couple of second-round picks. For a player who is probably going to acquire or to net them a first-round pick the year before, to drop that far and still not be able to be traded for as cheap of a contract as he has this year, $11.5 million, says a lot about where they are as a franchise. The step backs he's had, along with Gary Harris, they've just not performed well. The young guys that they've drafted, Mo Bamba has stepped up a little bit, but he's a free agent now. Franz Wagner is still there. Cole Anthony, Chuma Akiki, R.J. Hampton, Moritz Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr. is going to be kind of your future building blocks for this franchise as well. So they're going to have to figure out what they want to do with those options and figure out how they're going to be able to get some more victories. They do have a good coach in Jamal Mosley, who's going to have his second year with this team. He came over from the Dallas Mavericks a year ago anyway, after they passed over him for Jason Kidd to hire him. But Jonathan Isaac is going to be the biggest piece on this roster if they decide to flip him and maybe get some younger assets. But I still expect them to go the veteran route and try to bring in some veteran leadership to be able to get this team maybe over the 30, 40 win plateau, maybe even get them to 500. The Philadelphia 76ers, what can you say about them? They are a very interesting team from a number of different perspectives. First, just from the money. You have James Harden, who's entering the final year of his contract. If he opts out or if he opts in, doesn't matter. Are you really willing to offer him a max contract when the time comes, based on the season that he just had, in which he took more of a ball handler, distributor type of approach, which he's never been in his entire career? Or are you willing to put that money forward and hope he becomes more of that scorer that he was before with Houston? The fit of him and Joel Embiid hasn't worked seamlessly so far. They still have another $37 million tied up in Tobias Harris as well. Tobias Harris is a very good offensive weapon. Joel Embiid is a very good offensive and defensive weapon. But you're already seeing regression in James Harden. You traded away a couple of first-round picks, Seth Curry and Ben Simmons, all of your major young assets in order to get him on the roster, and it just didn't work out. Now, granted, it's a half a season. Give it one more year, maybe year two looks a lot better. But Daryl Morey, this trade does not look good on you right now. You have a lot of money issues going forward, and I don't see how you're going to solve them. They did bring in DeAnthony Melton for the cost of Danny Green and a first. They still have young guys in Matisse Thybulle who can give them some defensive efficiency. The biggest advantage that they do have on their roster is Tyrese Maxey outside of Joel Embiid. Maxey really took a step forward as a ball handler, so it seems like they may have solved their point guard role for now, but they need to give him the ball. They don't need to give it to Harden and let him go stand in the corner. So in order to make him the better player than what he is now, the question is still around James Harden and what are they going to do with him. I don't see how they're going to solve it this year. I think they're going to be more of the same this year, looking at a 3-4 playoff seed, maybe a first-round victory, but you're going to get bounced in the second round as things currently stand. Maybe you're able to add other pieces. I don't think the DeAnthony Melton acquisition helps you very much. Gives you a little bit more scoring on the outside, but I don't see how it solves any problems for you. To me, it just gives you another Danny Green-type player from 2 years ago. But again, we saw how far that got you. You didn't win a title that year, so I don't see them winning a title this year. Let us know in the comment section what you think of the Philadelphia 76ers investing this much in James Harden, and then what do you think they should do moving forward? They're kind of in a pickle just like the Nets with Kyrie. I don't see how they solve it. The Phoenix Suns are next on the list. DeAndre Ayton is their big free agent. They are not willing to give him a max contract. No matter how much they would tell you they'd love to keep him around, they're never going to give him $30+ million a year when he wasn't able to stay on the floor in a second-round series against the Dallas Mavericks. Now, that's one playoff series. The season, he's going to have a great regular season numbers every single year. But when it comes postseason time, he's going to be played off the floor by a team that has a good guard. And every single playoff team has a good guard. He's going to be on the bench in crunch time because he can't keep his feet moving and in front of the ball handler. Now, do all big men have this problem? Pretty much. But DeAndre Ayton really had his warts exposed right when he didn't need to as he enters free agency. Now, there's a number of teams out there that would be more than willing to take on his services. Detroit Pistons, teams that need a center, Charlotte Hornets. If you're looking at a sign-and-trade possibility, that opens it up to a number of other teams who need some improvement at that 5 position. Say the Dallas Mavericks, who do need to improve that 5 position. Maybe they look at him and put him up against Rudy Gobert. That way they're not out-rebounded by a wide margin every single time they go up against a high-quality premium big man. As far as this roster goes, they got a lot of expiring contracts coming up anyway. Jay Crowder, Dario Saric is there, Cameron Payne as well, Torrey Craig, Cam Johnson. All of these players have expiring deals coming up. JaVale McGee is a free agent, so they need to look at re-signing him if they choose not to bring back DeAndre Ayton. Mikal Bridges just signed that massive extension for him. He's going to be over $20 million a year now. He's going to be averaging around $23 million a year annually. He is a very good defensive player. He does disappear at times on the offensive end of the floor, depending on how hard he's working on the defensive end. This team is as good as Chris Paul is going to be, though. Chris Paul is getting a lot older and getting older a lot quicker than what people had thought a couple of years ago. We saw when he had extra days rest, he was able to perform very well. When he didn't have extra days rest in the postseason, he wore down. Dallas specifically targeted him on every single offensive possession, and it exposed him. He is getting older, so this team they need to rest him a little bit more during the regular season. I expect them to play a little bit more of a three-guard lineup, possibly to kind of combat the smaller lineups that they had difficulty with in the postseason, so that they're ready for it in the postseason. So with that said, I fully expect them to go after a point guard to back up to back up Chris Paul. If they are able to make a trade, the Hail Mary trade for a Kevin Durant, sending out Mikal Bridges, maybe this gives them a really high-end title window for a year or two. But after Chris Paul's is done, then they're going to have to move forward in a different direction. But Chris Paul's 36, almost 37 years old now. We had a great regular season, but we saw what happened in the postseason. They need to get him some backup. Maybe a guy like a Ricky Rubio who can handle the ball, somebody like that. Maybe they bring back Holiday or Elfrid Payton, something like that, to give him some depth at that point guard position. Portland, they had the most cap space before the offseason began anyway, and then they decided to go ahead and acquire Jeremy Grant. Anyway, that trade is still not official yet, but it will be eventually. They did take on a number of contracts over the past year or so to try to offload money so that they could spend money this offseason. However, there's not really an A-plus free agent out there. Jalen Brunson plays the same position as Damian Lillard. Zach LaVine is not going to trade the situation for Portland for the situation, or his situation in Chicago for the situation in Portland. It's not going to happen. The chip that they have to trade is going to be Eric Bledsoe. He has a partially guaranteed contract this year. They could flip that for something else and get more cap space, or just acquire a player via trade. Josh Hart has been rumored to be available as well. They have Nurkic as a free agent. They want to bring him back along with Anthony Simons, excuse me. They got a number of young guys as well on cheap contracts. But outside of Damian Lillard, this roster is devoid of talent. They need to acquire pieces. That's why they went and got Jeremy Grant in order to convince Damian Lillard to stay. Damian Lillard is loyal to a fault, it seems like. He does not want to leave Portland. As long as Portland is investing in this team, it seems like he wants to stay. They've already done a little bit, but they need to do more. Jeremy Grant is a nice fill-in, He's a nice player, a nice three player. But when you look at the pieces they traded away in Norman Powell and Robert Covington at the deadline, is he better than either one of those players? Maybe, but he's not leaps and bounds better. He's not enough to entice Damian Lillard to be able to stay in Portland better. So you got a lot of questions there in Portland. Maybe a guy that can score like a TJ Warren could take your money there and be able to make you a little bit better offensively. He's not a good defender at all, but offensively, he is a very good offensive player. Something like that could work out for them. If they decide to go ahead and let Nurkic walk and go the DeAndre Ayton route and get younger, something like that could make sense as well. Sacramento, we've already discussed them a little bit as well, how they want to push their chips to the center and be able to make the postseason. They have a couple of really nice veteran quality pieces: Domantas Sabonis, Harrison Barnes, and De'Aaron Fox. All three of those players are winning basketball players. They haven't been winning in years, though. So it really remains to be seen, is it just Sacramento, the culture that they developed there over the years of not being able to get in the postseason, that they just aren't able to push themselves over the hump, is more of a mental thing now? Or do they need to just blow it up again? If you're a Kings fan, I'm sorry, but you gave away Tyrese Halliburton. You've got to push your chips to the center, even more so than you already have. Getting a guy like a John Collins makes a lot of sense. As much as you love Tyrese Halliburton, he's already gone. Davion Mitchell was just drafted in the past draft. He's probably your best trade chip, along with Harrison Barnes, to be able to get somebody of that ilk in. You still need to be able to get a 2 or a 3 guard, a 2 or a 3-and-D type wing out there. A guy like Buddy Hield would make a lot of sense for them to be able to have right now. Too bad they already traded him away. But that would really solidify this roster and maybe get them into the postseason. I do expect them to push their chips to the center. Do I expect them to be successful in doing so? No. I don't expect it to work out. I expect them to miss the playoffs again, and for them to eventually have to tear it down to the studs again. San Antonio Spurs touched on them as well. They aren't willing to trade DeJounte Murray unless it's a Drew Holiday type package. I don't expect them to trade him at all. He's only 25 years old. Very good player. They got some good pieces there already building around them. But I could see them going after a piece to kind of supplement around Murray, like a Collins. Maybe they trade for Collins and Capella and be able to go with that as your front court over the next few years. That would be a very interesting tandem that they could have along with DeJounte Murray. Defense in Capella, offense in Collins, saves money for the Hawks, gets them off of the money of a lot of players, and allows their young guys to play that 2-3 role that they've drafted over the past couple of years. Devin Vassell was drafted as more of a defensive first type player and eventually would develop a three-point shot. He got a lot of minutes last year, so we'll see if he performs a little bit better. Beyond that, Keldon Johnson, he just leapt off the page or leapt off the screen every time I watched this team. Very athletic, small forward. He could be somebody who takes that Kawhi Leonard type step in the next year or so. Lonnie Walker is more of a scorer, but he didn't really develop that. He's a free agent as well. But Keldon Johnson was a very nice piece for them. So we'll see if they give him the ball and let this young team continue to grow and invest in it just a little bit. I don't expect them to go after any of the big pieces out there like a Zach LaVine or a Jalen Brunson, or even go after a trade like Kevin Durant. That just doesn't make sense for their timeline. But if they can get young pieces in there, maybe a guy like DeAndre Ayton goes there into their cap space, something like that could make a lot of sense. The Toronto Raptors, not hockey. Toronto Raptors have a number of different contracts on the books nowadays, high-priced guys. They were worried about losing a bunch of these guys in free agency a year or so ago. Fred VanVleet was one of them. He's got 2 years left at $20+ million a year. Gary Trent, 17.5 with another year left. OG Anunoby, who was in the news as far as being a trade candidate, along with Pascal Siakam for over a year now. They just weren't happy with how the lineup looked with him. Scotty Barnes is the future of this team. They kind of play a very similar type of style, very similar position as well. Maybe getting a shooter instead of a guy down low, Pascal Siakam type that takes up some of the lane and allows Scotty Barnes to kind of work there. They did make a trade at the deadline to kind of flip Goran Dragic. They brought in Thaddeus Young. He is now a free agent. Chris Boucher is also a free agent now. They have been interested in big men for pretty much the entire time, so maybe a trade of Siakam for a guy like Rudy Gobert makes sense for them, allows them to get the center that they've been wanting for a number of years while not giving up pieces that are important to their future. Siakam would be a great fit with the Utah Jazz, allow them to have kind of that four that they really haven't had. Bojan Bogdanovic, who plays the power forward for them, is on an expiring deal for the Utah Jazz, so maybe something going like that flips him later in another deal would make sense as well. But for the Toronto Raptors anyway, OG Anunoby is probably at the outside of the off season before the draft anyway. He was the most likely to be traded. They were not able to get high enough into the draft. They were trying to get some young pieces, and Anunoby was the guy they were trying to lure a team to be able to bite, to be able to take him. I expect him to stay with the Raptors right now. Gary Trent Jr. was the guy that was rumored to be in the Kristaps Porzingis trade rumors. They wisely were able to hold off and didn't get Kristaps and instead hung on to the better player. And so that seems to be where we're headed right now, is they're going to go with young guys and try to improve that center position and flip Siakam. Utah Jazz, we just spoke about them. They need to, or it seems like they need to just blow everything up. They got rid of Quinn Snyder, their coach. I don't really understand the move there. But he kind of saw the writing on the wall, kind of a mutual type decision, et cetera, et cetera. But the way things ended against the Dallas Mavericks, the way things have gone the past 3 or 4 years, the trades that they've made for Mike Conley just haven't worked out as well as they might have hoped to be able to get them to the conference finals, even to the NBA finals. It's just not working. There's friction between their two best players, and Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell is the guy you build around. You do not build around around a center in this day and age. Mitchell is also 4 years younger, so I expect them to kind of build around Donovan Mitchell and try to get some younger pieces. Maybe a Siakam would be a nice piece there. Rudy Gobert needs to be moved. A number of teams are going to be interested in services. It remains to be seen where he ends up going, but maybe a team that is looking for that finishing piece that has contracts to move out could do something like that. There was rumors for years that Rudy Gobert would be a nice fit in Dallas, and before the Christian Wood trade, I would totally have agreed with you. But spending $40 million on the center position when you need to invest in wings, and they just traded for Christian Wood, I don't think it makes sense anymore for the Dallas Mavericks to spend $40 million at the center position. Mike Conley is the point guard essentially of this team anyway, next to Donovan Mitchell. Um, I could see them moving him if they move off of Rudy Gobert. Maybe a team like the Washington Wizards put him next to Bradley Beal. It doesn't cost a lot so to make that type of acquisition. Maybe you get a guy like KCP back and Rui Hachimura. That'd be a really good 3-and-D type player. Plays really excellent defense. Was injured for most of the year last year. That's why he might be a little bit more gettable. Uh, KCP is on an expiring deal, so that'd be a good thing for you if things don't work out as well. And it gets you off Mike Conley's money for next year as well. Last but not least is going to be the Washington Wizards. I've mentioned them a number of different times. I expect Bradley Beal to opt out of his final year of his deal and re-sign for the Supermax. They do need to get a point guard there. They do need to finish building this team out. They got a lot of options as far as what they can do. They got a lot of talent at that power forward position and small forward position. So I think they need to consolidate it somewhere. They have Daniel Gafford down low anyway. He just signed that extension. I think it was 3 years, $38 million. But he's going to be their center next to Kristaps Porzingis. Bryant is going to be a free agent this offseason, so he's going to be gone. Teams who need somebody who can bang down low, kind of a thicker body, should go after Thomas Bryant. Kyle Kuzma, he's now extra. I see him as extra on this roster, but you're going to have to flip him for more of a premium piece, in my opinion. Otherwise, he's going to be a great sixth man for you, coming off the bench, maybe even playing that 3 position until Denny Avdija plays a little bit better or Corey Kispert develops in the offseason. This was Kispert's first season with the Wizards in the NBA, so seeing him develop would be a very nice thing for the Wizards. But this team really does need a point guard. They tried it with Dinwiddie last year. It didn't work. They were luckily able to find the Dallas Mavericks, who were willing to give them a 4, another thing that they were needing, in Kristaps Porzingis, and that at least solved one puzzle piece for them. He still commands a lot of money, so they're not going to have a lot of options when it comes to salary to be able to commit to that point guard position. But maybe somebody on a cheaper deal, Devontae Graham, Malcolm Brogdon, Mike Conley, somewhere on those middling contracts makes sense, and they could flip out some of those contracts to make something like that work. Conley had a terrible postseason, so maybe he's a lot more gettable than the other 2 options. Donovan Graham is a cheaper contract, and things didn't work out as well either with the New Orleans Pelicans, the most expensive of which is going to be Malcolm Brogdon. Probably going to cost at least a first-round pick, maybe more, plus the assets that you have. So something like that might not work for them for their timeline. So maybe a guy like Conley would be a little bit better on that higher value contract and a little bit more gettable for them. Maybe they flip out that KCP and Rui Hachimura that I mentioned. But let us know in the comment section what you think. Let us know some trade ideas that you have. I've seen a number of different trade ideas for a number of different teams anyway come over the last couple days. Just looking at the posts anyway that I've seen. Let me pull it up real quick. Success. There we go. I see a lot of you interested in the DeJounte Murray, where you think he might go. He's a very, very highly skilled player, and he's young, lanky, plays defense, good character. Popovich vouches for him, pretty much checks all the boxes, but I don't see a team willing to invest in a player that's not quite a star and giving up assets of a star plus. Drew Holiday was seen as that type of a player before they moved him to Milwaukee. That trade worked out really well for them. I don't see it being duplicated again. Milwaukee was in a special circumstance where that was the final piece that they needed. I don't see any of these teams in that category. A team like the Washington Wizards, who could be that final piece away, they don't really have the developed youth yet. They still need another year for Kispert and Avdija to develop into NBA level players. Right now, their prospect value isn't as high as it was, say, a year ago, just because they need to develop more. So they're not going to be able to pull off a trade like that. The Collins trade that I mentioned earlier, Collins and Capella for Collins for DeJounte Murray, doesn't make sense unless you keep DeJounte Murray to acquire Collins. It just doesn't make sense. So from that perspective, I don't see DeJounte Murray going anywhere. Some of the other names I've seen mentioned a lot of you guys are interested in moving around Gordon Hayward. Again, I don't see how that contract is moved. $30 million a year for a guy who's injured. Maybe you move him for a guy like Russell Westbrook. But again, what are the Hornets going to do with Russell Westbrook? They'd rather have Gordon Hayward, who, when he does play, averages 15 to 20 a night, gives you good defense and effort, and is a team leader. Plus, he's your number one acquisition in free agency since, I don't know, your birth of a franchise. So I don't see them moving him at all. The one player I do see y'all mentioning some is going to be D'Angelo Russell in some of the comments on some of the other videos I've made. D'Angelo Russell would make sense on a number of different teams because he is an expiring contract. He hasn't really found that permanent home yet. However, he is close with Karl Anthony Towns. Just for that reason alone, I see a path to the Timberwolves keeping him. But if they want to move forward and get a guy like a John Collins, something like that would make sense as well. But thank you guys again for joining us here at the Upside, going through the entire NBA free agency. Quite a few of y'all joined us here today through both our part one stream, which was interrupted anyway, as I had a knock on the door, unfortunately, and part two, where we kind of went team by team. Send us your trades if you have any ideas as to what you'd like to see your favorite team do. Where do you see your favorite player going? What player do you want to see your team acquire? That kind of a thing. But again, thank you for joining us here at the Upside, and we'll see you next time.